Hey there and welcome to Grace Church. We are so glad you are here, and it's May 1st. So hopefully spring's coming, maybe. If this is your first time, we're glad you're here, and my name is Joel, and we'd love to meet you. We'd love to get you connected to what God is doing here at Grace. And probably the easiest way to do that is to hop onto our website where you can find a connection card, you can find our contact info, and just events and things to get connected to in the coming weeks. We'd also love to meet you in person at our 10:30 service at the Barberton campus. We'd love for you to come and join us for worship and teaching. And if you have kids, we have kids programming that happens during that service. Grab a cup of coffee and join us. We'd love to meet you there. Why don't you kind of high five those around you, maybe get yourself ready for some worship. We're excited to jump into singing together and then talking about who we are as Grace Church.
I've carried a burden too long on my own. I wasn't created to bear it alone. I hear your invitation to let it all go. I see it now, I'm laying it down, and I know that I need you. So I run to the Father, I fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, no reason to wait. My heart needs a surgeon, my soul needs a friend. So I run to the Father. Saw my condition, had a plan from the start. Your son for redemption, the price for my heart. And I don't have a context for that kind of love. I don't understand, I can't comprehend. All I know is I need you. So I run to the Father, I fall into grace. I'm done with the hiding, no reason to wait. My heart needs a surgeon, my soul
Like I said, we're so glad that you are here joining us this week. We are in the final part of this series called We. And so if you are just jumping in, like I said, we're so glad you're here. Would love for you to check out the first 2 weeks starting on Easter weekend, and hopefully you can catch up to the conversation. But today we're finishing it out. And the question I have for you is one I asked last week. What do you value? All right? What do you value? Because this whole series is built on the values of Grace Church. And for some of us in life, our values flesh out in family, right? Whether it's family time, or maybe it's just the family aspect and being with family. Maybe it's work for some of us. We value working hard, or working long hours, or working in a passionate job that we have. Maybe for some of us, it's fun and having all the toys and the vacations and the trips. For others of us, maybe it's things a little deeper, right? The passions of your life, the character of your life, right? Friendships of your life, whatever it may be, right? Your spirituality. All of us have values, and here's the thing about values. Our values dictate what we do and what we don't do. They dictate what we do, what we'll spend time and energy on, what we'll go and do with others. It also dictates what we don't do, why we won't go there, why we won't do this, why we won't spend money on that. And at Grace Church, we have 8 values. And these 8 values, they go across all of our campuses. If you don't know this, we are one church with 8 locations, and you hopped into the Barberton campus. And these values go across our campuses. And in each context, you see these values play out, even if they look maybe slightly different to the culture and to the context of that campus. And what we're doing over the 3 weeks that we're kind of talking about these values is looking at 3 foundational values. We live to make Jesus make sense. We share life together. That was the first 2 weeks. And we have no spare parts is today. And saying, what in the world are these about? Kind of what's the biblical vision for these? Why would we invest into these? And then ultimately out of that, inviting you to think about how you play a part in that and how you belong as a part of Grace Church and jumping into these values, because they really dictate what we will do and what we won't do as a church. And like I said last week, and you'll see it this week in some different ways, we share life together. It means my body for the body. What we see in these values is they're not just values that tell us how to do programs. They're values telling us how to interact with each other, interact with our God, and interact with those who are interested and intrigued by the conversation of Jesus. And so ultimately, all of these values kind of require us to lay something down, lay our life down, sacrifice and serve as a part of moving forward as a church and growing in that. And so today we're going to talk about the value, we have no spare parts. Now, I don't know how you deal with spare parts in your house, but I know some people, right, when you have spare parts, or maybe you do a construction or you do a renovation in your home, you are the person to keep all of the spare parts, right? You keep the doors, you keep the handles, you keep the nails, you keep the screws, whatever it may be, and you have it all in your basement ready to go for the next project. Others of us, we don't value spare parts, or we don't value the whole of the parts of the project or whatever it may be. I just about a year ago put a dishwasher, I shouldn't say my father-in-law did. I was standing next to him, and I will take full credit for being there, but not doing any of the work. As he put in a dishwasher, we were taking out a piece of our cabinetry. And what it required was that cabinet we lost, we put the dishwasher in, and it gave us about 6 to 8 inches on the side of that we had space to put pans and stuff. But we didn't really have a cabinet to use. And so my brother-in-law, who does cabinetry, right, he built us like a little 6-8 inch cabinet there, little thing that we could have a door, slide all the pans in and go. Super excited, right? He brought it over, he placed it in there, and he said, I even drilled a little bit of hole here so that you can put a cabinet knob on it. And me being me, right, the cabinet we took out, I thought was just trash at that point, because I thought, well, it's just a bunch of spare parts that I don't really need. And so me being me, I put it on the curb and threw it out, or someone took it and it was gone. And so I, on that day, had no extra cabinet knobs that matched the cabinetry in our house. So I had to go to Home Depot and Ace, and lo and behold, there are not any that match the cabinetry in our kitchen. And so I bought one that completely looked different than the others, and my wife will not let me have it. Like, we're not going to put that in there, she said, right? Because all I saw was a bunch of spare parts. And here's the reality. For some of us, when we think of spare parts, it's just like as needed, or it's extras, or maybe they're worthless. And I think for some of us, if we were to be honest, in our life or in our journey or in our families or in our friendships, maybe for some of us, we feel like spare parts. Maybe even your past church experience, that's been the case. Where you kind of just feel like, am I even worth it? Do I have anything to bring to the table? Do I have any gifts or abilities that will give to this or that? And you kind of feel like that cabinet pulled out and isn't needed anymore, and so you just kind of put it on the curb. And today what we're going to find is this value of we have no spare parts. Actually, the individual understanding, how we understand that individually in our purpose and how God has identified us through Jesus, gives to us growing as a church, because no one in Grace, no one in our church is a spare part. No one, I believe, in the world is a spare part. That God has created us, the Creator has given us gifts and abilities to give to His mission and to His world. When we look at this idea of we have no spare parts, this is what it means. It's how we would define it. Everyone in the church has an essential part to play. By discovering and developing how we fit into God's storyline, we experience unimaginable supernatural life change in and around us. But how do we understand this, right? It's a nice definer, but how do we understand how we fit into God's storyline and see ourselves as a part of His mission, as a part of His family, as a part of what He is doing? Well, the first thing you have to understand is this: the Creator made us. God created us, He made us, He fashioned us, and He gave us specific kind of inner abilities, passions, personalities to play out. We see that in Psalm 139, very famous verses here. This is what the psalmist writes: "For You created my inmost being, You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise You because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from You when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in Your book before one of them came to be." What we see is that our Creator, He created us value, worth, abilities, character, personalities, and gifts. And He created me uniquely. What's beautiful is there's no one identical to you, right? Even if you're an identical twin, there are differences to be had. That no one is exactly like you. And He did that. He created us uniquely to give to each other, to ultimately use those gifts to worship Him and to partner with Him in the world that He has created. But if you look at Genesis 3, the story goes that our sin actually marred us. It separated us. It put us in a place where all of a sudden we used all of those gifts and all of those abilities for self-centric motives. And in sin, we kind of lose sight of the reason for our gifts, because at the root of sin is pride. And what pride does is it takes my gifts and it makes it a self-focused and self-gain kind of conversation. That all of a sudden my gifts are the thing to promote me, or the gifts are the thing to do this, or my passions are the this. Or for some of us, we feel like spare parts because we don't recognize our value and our worth, and that the Creator loves us. That God created us in His image, not to our own. And what we see ultimately play out in God's biblical story is that Jesus redeems the mission. He redeems our purpose. And it tells me that Jesus died and rose again, yes, for my salvation, yes, for my eternity, but also it tells me that my eternal state, it changes my current earthly state. And what happens, and what I mean by that, is it refocuses my passions, and it refocuses my life, and it refocuses my mission. And so all of a sudden what Jesus did, yes, gives me eternity with Him, but it realigns everything on this earth. And so when we talk about having no spare parts, it's not just a fun little statement that we use, but ultimately connected to the gospel, it starts to explode. The beauty of that starts to explode around the mission that Jesus has us on, which is to make Jesus make sense to the world around us. That the church, its mission is to love differently, to live differently for the sake of others coming to know Jesus and being redeemed into that. And out of that flows a loving relationship with each other. And we looked at a passage last week, Romans 12, that I want to kind of flesh out a little bit more today and jump kind of into and see what Paul has to say about this idea of gifts, of passions, abilities, and serving one another. Romans 12, 1 through 2, we looked at this last week. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, we talked about that last week, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Here's what I want you to see. That we have no spare parts means my body for the body. Okay? I'm literally ripping that off of last week. Right? Didn't change it at all because I think this value and these ideas of values literally mean us living as a living sacrifice, laying down our life for each other. And so when I talk about no spare parts, right? When I look at the gospel and look at what Jesus has done for me, he laid down everything for the sake of me having life. And when he invites us into the church to love like he has loved, he says, I want you to love as I have loved. I want you to love one another, and it's defined ultimately in what I've done for you. Then that means that this love is going to be radical. I'm going to have to lay down my life to ultimately serve others. And so when we look at that, we're going to see that flesh out in what Paul is saying. And what's interesting is Paul continues, and he talks about it in verse 2 a little bit more. We talked about it last week. He talks about not conforming to the patterns of this world and renewing our minds. Based on verses 1, right? Verse 1 talks about this idea of the gospel, and in light of that, live as a living sacrifice, and don't be conformed to the patterns of this world. Well, what does it look like to conform to the patterns of this world with our gifts and abilities? Well, I think conforming to the world means my gifts for my mission. The world would tell us to embrace a prideful way of using what God has given us, that it becomes my mission, becomes my focus, becomes my success. And that's what gifts purely are. But when we renew our minds, we renew our mind in the gospel, in his mercy, his grace, his love. We renew our mind in his truth. And what we see kind of as the biblical storyline, it's my gifts for our mission, the mission of Jesus that he invites all of us onto. And as I offer my body as a living sacrifice, I start to see our Savior who has laid down his life and what it means that he's invited us into his mission. That my gifts are a gift that is used for the sake of the mission. It's not just gifts to promote. It's not gifts that I have attained by something or how good I am. It's not even gifts that for some reason I have kind of just come up with myself. It's gifts that have been given for the sake of the mission. And until we connect that to the gospel and understand that Jesus redeems us, rescues us, we'll never fully understand how to direct our purposes, how to direct our giftings, how to direct our passions. All of a sudden, we get invited into something that is bigger than us. He invites us to lay our life down for the sake of that. This illustration I read in a book, Gaining by Losing by J.D. Greer, and I've used it before, but I think this is a great way to kind of understand what Paul is talking about here. J. Greer would use this illustration of different boats and how sometimes the church can be seen as these different kinds of boats, and what actually the church in the early church and beginnings of the church and what the church's vision ultimately was. He says there's 3 different boats, and the first one is like a cruise liner. In a cruise liner, you know this, it is entertainment, entertainment, entertainment. Come, you can do anything and everything. We got pools, we got slides, we got golf, we got activities, we got shows, we got food 24/7, right? Which just sounds really good and fun. But when you equate that to the church, and some people see the church as a cruise liner where it's entertainment, 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 where I sit in the seat, and as long as the church has my needs met, then that is the church that I want to be a part of. And we see it just as an entertainment to keep my kids happy or to kind of fulfill myself a little bit during the week. There's others that see the church as like a battleship. A battleship is this. You have a battleship that goes out to sea, and all the professionals, right, control the battleship and make the battleship happen, and people watch the battleship take down the enemies. And what he would say is some people see the church as a battleship. We see the pastor, the staff members, maybe some of the elders as the ones that do ministry, and we clap them on. He said, lastly, is an aircraft carrier. If you know anything about aircraft carriers, they're giant ships that carry aircraft, and they send the airplanes off of the aircraft to go do battle and travel around the seas that way. And he said, what if we saw the church as an aircraft carrier? That we're encouraging, equipping everyone to go Monday through Saturday, fly their plane out into the mission field, right? And to do the work of the church. And sometimes I think that we actually kind of minimize what God is trying to do in our life if we just see the church as entertainment or just see the church as professionals. That he's inviting all of us to be on mission together. And he's given each of us unique gifts and abilities to do so. And the reality is that we invite you to invest. That the question I would ask this, are you willing to be an aircraft? Are you willing to be an airplane? Are you willing to deny yourself and to take up your cross and lay down your life, ultimately using your gifts for the sake of the mission? Because as we invite you to invest, I promise this, we promise to equip and encourage you, right? I think the question I have myself and maybe even my staff is this: am I willing to deny myself for the sake of encouraging and equipping you all to the mission God has sent us on? So it's not just about me. It's not just about the professionals doing it, but we want to see you thrive inside of the gifts God has given you. And here's the reality. We're going to pursue the ideal while navigating the real. If I were to be honest, sometimes it is chunky, sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's confusing, and yet we're going to do this together. If you step into investing, we invite you to do that. We'll step into encouraging and equipping as best as we can, and we'll dance together. Because here's where Paul goes. Romans 12, verse 3. He gives us an idea what no spare parts means. It says this, "For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you." Here's what he would say. No spare parts means humility. It means humility, okay? And it might be a unique one to start with, but he's literally saying that our gifts and abilities, just the fact of being a follower of Christ should lead to humility, should be the thing of humility. And so when we talk about giving our body up for the sake of the body, it's embracing humility. It's embracing humility. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. Paul tells us, do not think of yourselves more highly, right? It's easy to become prideful about my gifts. It just is. Right? It's easy to think that I have it going on and they don't. Or it's easy to think that my gifts are better than theirs. Or it's easy to think that I'm doing it more or doing it better than theirs. And what happens is when we become prideful, we become hierarchical with our gifts. That it's like this gift's up here, this gift's down here. And we only use this every once in a while, but man, this is the, right? And what I think Paul's setting us up to say is, no. Your gifts are given as a gift, and it leads to us understanding humility. Humility that Jesus demonstrates to us and leads us into this conversation. Me and my wife just started a series. We are super late in the game for this, but Downton Abbey, I don't know if anybody's seen that, but we're in like episode 2, okay? So we'll see if it lasts. But if you've watched it, it's about a kind of early 1900s, early 20th century kind of British family that has a lot of money and has this giant castle they live in, and they have anywhere from butlers, cooks, to servants, to maids, all this different stuff going on, right? They are the kind of family in the city, and they kind of run the house, run the land, all of that stuff. And what's interesting is one of the daughters is supposed to get married to this young man. And this young man comes from not that situation, not kind of the hierarchical, not kind of the rich or famous family. And he's presented to them and ultimately kind of pushes back against their lifestyle. He has a butler that's coming to help him, and he kind of pushes against that. And What's interesting is the father of this household says something fascinating as he's pushing against having someone help him or having someone kind of be a part of him being there. He says this: we all have different parts to play, and we must all be allowed to play them. Right? We all have different parts to play. We must all be allowed to play them. And what he was saying is this, that butler, as much as you may not feel comfortable with, he has a part to play inside of our family, inside of this city, inside of what's happening here in our home. He has a part to play. In pride, what it does is it dismisses the parts. It dismisses the parts. That pride becomes very centric on a part, not the parts that give to the body. That ultimately Paul wants us to understand that your gift is a gift. It's a gift of grace, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit, from the Spirit of God. 1 Corinthians 12:4, this is what Paul also writes. There are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. That spiritual gifts are a gift from the Spirit. And when you connect your life to Jesus, right, the Spirit takes residence in you. And the Spirit's role is to guide you in truth. And what I think ultimately happens is the Spirit, as he guides you into gospel truth, what he ultimately will highlight is that every gift is valuable, though not identical, right? Every gift is valuable. That every gift, right, is presented, whether it's an encourager, a teacher, ministry, servant, whatever it is, right? Every gift is valuable, even though it's not identical. And praise the Lord, it's not identical, right? We would be a weird-looking body if not all the parts were different. But also, every gift is from the Spirit. And that tells me that pride should not exist because gifts are a gift. They're something that the Spirit gives to us because we connect our life to Jesus. But the opposite is also true. Like I said, humility is not thinking less of myself, it's thinking myself less. So humility is not, it's bucking against pride, but it's also bucking against being ashamed or belittling my gifts, right? I oftentimes will talk to people and we'll be talking about what I do for a living, right? I'm a pastor, so I speak on a weekly basis and sometimes multiple times a week. And oftentimes we'll be like, I cannot believe you do that. I could never do what you do, right? And sometimes it comes in a way of like feeling almost ashamed of maybe how God's gifted them. Like, I can't, I could never do what you do. Wow, you do it so well, you do this. And of course I'm encouraged by their compliments, but at the same time, I'm like, don't belittle what you are gifted in, because I could never do what you're doing. Like, I don't have the thought process of that, or I can't do that. And if you weren't a part of what's going on, what I'm doing wouldn't matter, because it'd just be like very centric on this one gift. That ultimately, like I said, every gift is valuable, not identical, and all gifts need the other gifts. We do. That it is a part of being a part of the body, what Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 12. Paul, he talks about it this way. He says, think of yourself with sober judgment. What he would say is literally recognize your gifts and use them for the sake of the body. That you have a place inside of the body. And humility invites me to value others with my gifts. Not to compare and contrast, not to say, my gift better, is it not, but to find out what my purpose, my gifting, my identity in that is, and to use it for the sake of others, to value others above myself. That's what Paul writes in Philippians. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others. That it should be a party when I recognize my gift. Right? It should be a gift party that all of a sudden I have a way to now value others above myself. And sometimes I think we look at certain gifts, we're like, I wish, or I wonder if, or am I not doing it right? When God reveals to you where he has gifted you and you use it in such a way to value others, the body is going to be better for it. There are people in our church that are just intense encouragers. Their gift is encouragement, and they're behind the scenes in a lot of ways. No one would know that, but they are some of the people that keep me going and keep my staff going and keep encouraging our leaders. And if they weren't there, right, if they weren't encouraging, right, then it would be missing the fullness of the body would be missing. And so I guess the question I ask out of this is, how can I use my gifts for the interest of others, to value others above myself? Humility does not say, think of myself less or think of myself more. It's thinking of myself less. So when I walk into a room, if I believe that we have no spare parts, then automatically humility, I should embrace humility for the sake of valuing others with my gifts. God's not giving it to me so that I can show it off, but ultimately so that I can show out to others what love is about. Well, Paul continues in verses 4 and 5, and he says this, "For just as each of us has one body with many members, these members do not all have the same function. So in Christ, we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others." This is what I think he would say. We have no spare parts. It highlights the unique and unity of the body. It highlights unity and uniqueness inside the body. Did you know the human body has it doesn't have about, it has 78 organs in your body. I guess maybe depending on who you are, it's about 78, but it has 78 organs in your body, okay? And the reality is that's just kind of major, minor organs, like the things that they identify there. There's thousands of just body parts and cells and all of the different things that make our body work, all the way down to the smallest and smallest that you can't even see. And so what's interesting is we all have one body. And there's parts that are all moving together to make it happen. My arms wouldn't be moving without the function of my brain. My legs, talking, walking, all that stuff, there's things working together and they all have different ways of doing it to make the body move. That's what Paul's saying here. There's one body, many parts. He talks about that in Romans 12, but also 1 Corinthians 12, Ephesians 4. He talks about it in different ways. Your body is on one mission. Your physical body is on one mission, a thriving life, right? All the different parts are uniquely gifted and given ability to shape sizes to achieve that mission. And God created us as one body on a mission to make Jesus make sense. And here's the reality. Jesus will not make sense if there's only one part that forms the body, because it will only make sense to a very small sector of people. But what if all the parts work together to move as one body into our world to make Jesus make sense? All of a sudden, the body will connect with so many different people because the parts are all playing their part. There's some of you who are great evangelists. I'm a terrible evangelist. I just am a terrible evangelist, right? And you do the work Monday through Saturday every single week that no one sees, right? And yet without you, right, there may not be new faces that we see. There may not be gospel proclamation going out like it is. For others of you are deeply encouraging, and that keeps people faithful and in the game and encouraged to keep walking. Some of you are equippers, right? You just know how to equip people in ministry through knowledge, through life, through mission, and you're providing that. Some of us, you are teachers, right? And you're teaching, or ministry. You're just doing the work of ministry. You're servants, whatever it may be. And every part is a part to play in the mission. And when one thing is off, it throws the body completely off. And here's what I believe. There must be unity across difference and equally a diversity of uniqueness. Unity across difference at the same time as there is diversity of uniqueness. And I think that what's interesting is oftentimes I think when we think about our gifts, we always wonder, is there a program for me to get connected to? And I wonder myself, what if we thought less about a program and more about people? How can we come around each other and those who are outside of the body to ultimately use our giftings? And every gift can be used and encouraged and equipped. And this is what I would say. If you're someone that's like, I don't know what my gifting is, I don't know what this is, I don't know what that looks like, that is okay. We have something called Shape that we're doing after service today, actually in person, but we would have the ability to do that in other times if you're interested in that. But I would say this, if you're like, I'm just not sure where I fit in and I want to invest my life into what's going on at Grace, I would encourage you to do some things. Maybe the first step is to serve and then survey your gifts. Sometimes like actually experiencing ministry allows you to understand where your ministry is at. Right? There's times where I would jump into opportunities and I'm like, man, that is not it, right? I went to Philly, inner city, doing missions stuff there. And in my experience there, I just knew I wouldn't fit into an inner city context. I just don't fit into it. And my ministry is not most beneficial there. And there's some people that can walk the streets and talk the talk and reach people for Jesus, right? Sometimes you got to serve in it and then survey your gifts alongside of that. I would also say after that, survey with someone. When you do assessments or you do gifting tests, all this stuff, like survey with someone. Have someone that's wise in gifts and just has a wisdom of maturity and spiritual wisdom just to navigate that with you, because it can be really confusing and hard to navigate. And then I would just say share your gifts, right? It doesn't always have to function inside of a program or inside of a set time, right? I think about encouragers on our campus that are just sending text, emails, who are just saying it verbally, right? And I'm like, I have not told them to do that. That's just their gifting. They know to use it, right? There's some hospitality people that, yeah, Sunday morning it works, but they do it at home. They invite people over. Life groups have it going on, right? There's so many different ways. You don't have to wait to share it. And sometimes it comes very, very visually in something that the church is doing organizationally, right? And you use it then also. That would be my invitation, is how do you see the unity of these gifts inside the body and the uniqueness, and allow those to give to the mission of the body, making Jesus make sense. But then he continues, and this is what he says. Romans 12, 6-8. He ends this way. We have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it's to show mercy, do it cheerfully. This is what I would say. We have no spare parts means gifts in love. Gifts in love. We could spend a lot of time dissecting the gifts themselves, which is well worth a sermon, which is well worth the time. That's why we do Shape. It will allow you to see kind of where the gifts land for you, what you can focus on. We would have resources out of that to provide you. That's a great setting to see that. I don't necessarily want to spend a ton of time on the gifts, right? He talks about giving and generosity, talks about mercy, talks about teaching, talks about prophesying, right? Prophesying not necessarily like telling the future, but to proclaim the truth of God, to maintain that vision and to continue to push each other towards that. Teaching, of course, leading, all of these, serving, all these different things. You could flesh those out, talk about how each of those work. But the one thing that unifies all of those is that the gifts themselves mean nothing without grace. He says this, we have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. That what I need to see is that the gifts given to me are a gift of grace, that it is a part of the gospel, that the gospel is a gift of salvation, it's a gift of eternity, but it's also a gift of being adopted in God's family and a gift of receiving gifts and understanding, giving clarity to the gifts God has given me to use towards his mission. That I also see that his gifts not just are a gift to me and they're nothing without grace, but my gifts are also nothing without me using them in grace. That if I am not aware of how I am using my gifts, sometimes I can use them in a prideful way or in a harsh way or in a way to get what I want or in a way that ultimately is not loving or gracious towards others. That I think these gifts are not meant to use and abuse, but they're meant to ultimately share and show love. That no matter where you're at, where you're leading, you're giving, you're serving, you're doing this, you're doing that, your gifts are there. If they are not acted out in grace and love, then I think we've lost the point. That our gifts aren't necessarily just given so that we can use them and move on, but they're ultimately gifts so that we can demonstrate grace and love of Jesus through very tangible ways, through very hands-on ways, so that people can see the gospel in clear and tangible ways. Paul talks about the gifts of the body in 1 Corinthians 12, and then the chapter following that, he says, let me show you the most excellent way. And then he goes into this. I think it's fascinating. 1 Corinthians 13, very famous passage, right? If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, if I have faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I'm nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship, that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. What is he saying there? I can have all the gifts in the world, but if it's not connected to love, it has no meaning, it has no impact, it has no influence, and it has no kingdom impact. That literally, if my gifts are just for me, they fall flat. They just become useless. They become like a resounding gong. They just become like something that it doesn't matter. What Paul is saying is like, no. Understand that your gifts are identified, are revealed, are seen because of the gift you've received in the gospel, right? And the fact that God created you, he's given you these passions, he's given you these gifts, and Jesus redeems that for his mission, and it's a gift that we get to use that for his mission. But also, I need to continue to look back at the mercy and grace and love so that I use my gifts in a way of grace and love towards others, so they see Jesus. The point of my gifts is not for people to see me, it's to see Jesus. The point of the gift is not for me to succeed, but for the mission to succeed. The point of the gift is not for me and my mission, it's for us and our mission, which is connected to Jesus. And when we say we have no spare parts, that is such a true statement that we cannot do this separately, but to do it together means that we have to run into the ideal and embrace the real. Sometimes we have to refocus, and sometimes it gets chunky, and sometimes it gets hard. But the more that we do it together and invite others in, I believe the mission, the love, the grace of Jesus Christ will become more visible. So the questions I have to finish is, are you a part of the body? Have you said yes to Jesus? Have you come to a point where connecting your life to Jesus is the answer, and that's the only answer? And if you have, the question I have for you is, are you giving your body for the body? Are you giving your body for the body? We would love to talk about what your gifts are and abilities, and maybe that's the next step. Maybe you know that and you're just not taking that step. And for others, maybe you don't know your gifts and abilities. Maybe you don't know where you play the part in the body, and we'd love to walk through Shape and Tag with Discovery with you. We have one after our in-person service today, but we'll have others in the future, and we'd love to just sit with you and talk through that with you and get you connected to what God's doing. And so if you're interested in having those conversations, let us know. We're so glad that you're here. We want you to know that you belong, that you are someone who can invest in ultimately what God's doing through grace in Barberton, and we're excited that you're in for the journey. So why don't we pray? Father, we thank you so much for who you are and all that you do. Grateful for you. Thank you for Jesus and ultimately him redeeming us, rescuing us, and revealing to us how our gifts should be used inside the body. We're grateful for you. We love you. We just pray over all of those listening, those that are part of our church, that they would know that they are not a spare part. They are part of the mission and the body of what you're doing. Praise you and love you. Pray this in your name. Amen. Have a wonderful, wonderful week, and we will see you later.